This is the news, and you're on Breakthrough. I'm Eugene Perrier.
And I'm Monica Cruz. Thanks for tuning in to our weekly live stream every Wednesday at 8. We're coming to you with some of the most pressing news and issues of the week. So thanks for joining us. We're excited to be here.
We are very excited, as always, weekly. I don't even know how many weeks this has been, but we're institutionalizing it here. Now, one thing we just want to remind everyone as we start the broadcast, take a second right now, share this broadcast wherever you may be watching so your friends, family, enemies, whoever it is who follows you, you get the great content that we have. As always, every week, we got a great show coming up for you here this evening. As you undoubtedly expect, we're going to have a lot from the ongoing uprising against racist oppression that is sweeping the United States and really, in fact, sweeping the world. And we'll also be talking about the worldwide aspect as well as what is happening here in the United States. A little bit about some of the slogans that are behind the movement, like defunding the police and what it means, and also the really inspiring story, also really rooted in Minneapolis, where this uprising started and expanding across the country, of people pushing for getting the cops out of schools, doing things to break the school to prison pipeline. So there's a lot happening around the country, a lot happening around the world, all being powered by this massive uprising in this country against racist oppression. So a lot here for you. Take the chance. Please share it. But before we get into it, first, we want to go back to Monica for some headlines.
A new report has found that 7.7 million American workers were laid off in April. Though 2.5 million jobs were gained back in May, this is largely a result of temporarily laid off workers going back to work and part-time jobs. To put this into perspective, there are now 4.6 unemployed workers for each job opening. The Trump administration and Wall Street say that the recovery is now well underway, leading to surges in the stock market indexes. But the pain continues to grow among the working class as the economic crash has reached historic proportions. And as states across the country proceed with the early stages of reopening the economy, it is now rural towns and small cities that are beginning to see coronavirus infections spike at alarming rates. 14 states have seen increases in the infection rate just this week, and many hospital systems far away from the major metropolitan centers are already being overwhelmed, although it's receiving minimal media attention. There are still significant questions about whether the virus can be transmitted asymptomatically, how many people have been infected already, and if those previously infected can get it again. Experts warn that the infection rate will quickly escalate if people stop social distancing, which is impossible for millions who can't afford to stay home and not work. That is, unless the government were to cancel the rent, mortgages, and other bills for the duration of the pandemic. And in international news, the systematic assassination of those who fight for peace, labor rights, and social transformation continues to take place in Colombia. 3 indigenous leaders, 2 social leaders, 2 former FARC combatants, and a family member of an ex-combatant were killed in just the last week of May. According to the FARC, which became an above-ground legal party as part of the peace deal to date, quote, 199 former guerrilla members in the reincorporation process and 41 family members have been killed without any effective action taken by the Colombian state to stop this extermination, end quote. And finally, Minnesota's Department of Public Safety confirmed that state troopers and police officers in Minneapolis did in fact slash the tires of dozens of parked cars during the huge protests there. A video depicting the officers slashing tires went viral, as well as videos from protesters, journalists, and medics who discovered their tires slashed and were left stranded. On Monday, the department spokesperson said the officers targeted cars that were carrying, quote, items used to cause harm during violent protest, without specifying the items they looked for, nor providing any evidence that the cars contained such items.
Well, as most of you, I'm sure, know, there is a massive uprising continue to sweep the United States, all 50 states, the depth and the breadth of the country. It's spreading around the world. The past several days have seen ongoing actions of really all sizes and all sorts of communities. So we wanted to give you some of the sights and sounds of the past few days from the movement sweeping this country.
Crowds returned to American streets again today, following yesterday's mass demonstrations protesting the death of George Floyd. Overnight, it got ugly in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. Washington, D.C. Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis joined the city's mayor to visit the site near the White House, renamed Black Lives Matter Plaza.
I think with the people in D.C. and around the nation, it sent a mighty, powerful, and strong message to the rest of the world.
In San Francisco, demonstrations blocked traffic along the iconic Golden Gate Bridge. A Chicago rally drew nearly 30,000.
Well, you can see obviously there, Monica, and we'll show more of this moving forward here, the massive crowds all over the place. I mean, the one thing that really sticks with me, and Representative John Lewis spoke to this about this being a powerful message, is what we are seeing is the power of the people in the streets to move the political agenda in this country. I mean, polling that's come out in just the past few days, one poll showing a 28% increase in support for Black Lives Matter in the past 2 years, 17% since the death of George Floyd. That poll had it at 53% of people, every single demographic subset increasing its support significantly. Republicans, white, young, old, rich, poor, very notable. And the question is being asked by pollsters in many different ways, but we're seeing 60%, 70% saying they support the protest, saying that police violence is more concerning to them than anything they're hearing about quote unquote rioting and looting. So, I mean, I think we're really seeing, however opportunistic a lot of these brands and politicians and other people may be in just wanting to be associated with the protest, I think we're really seeing that this is a mass movement that is shaking the foundations of this country and is really changing people's minds and expanding people's understanding of what's possible on this issue. And I think it's really amazing to watch.
It really is. What we're seeing right now is history being made in front of our very own eyes. We know this, that real social change has only come from mass movements like what we're seeing. And I'm just hoping this energy doesn't die down, because we understand that in this context of the pandemic, this is why people are so righteously enraged, aside from the nonstop state lynchings of Black people that we have been fighting against for centuries, right? It was really nice to see someone like John Lewis, someone who was marching as a young man back in the 60s and is still marching in his old age. We see nothing has changed, right? But folks are beginning to see the connections between state violence and racism and poverty as the pandemic has really uncovered the facade of the country that we live in, that has placed profit over human lives. And I think those statistics are especially interesting, talking about how people are more concerned about this issue of Black Lives Matter than all the looting and rioting that we have been hearing nonstop about from the corporate media and from politicians on both sides of the aisle, right? And it's very clear that people are tired of seeing our government time and time again prioritize profit over human lives. And I think we're in a really, really powerful moment. And I just say commend everyone who's been hitting the streets. I know I have, and we just got to keep it up.
Yeah, I think all the cynical takes about, the movement, the message is being lost and all of that, that's just being proven to be wrong. People are getting the message, however it's being delivered in this uprising, and it's being delivered in a lot of different ways, I think loud and clear, that this is about justice for 400 years of racist suppression. Well, talking about just the movement in general, I think it's important to drill down for some of the things that are happening in the local areas, regional areas, that I think show a lot of the points that, we've been making, Monica. In Seattle over the weekend, this past Friday night, or I think it was actually Thursday in the afternoon, the mayor said we're going to have a 30-day ban on gas. We're going to stop gassing people, basically trying to say, I'm with you, I'm with the protesters. I don't think people really believed her, but nevertheless, this is what she set herself up for. Saturday night, there was a protest that, quote unquote violated the curfew, but, obviously these people were violating no law. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I'm not into the good protester, bad protester thing, but, this is a peaceful protest. The police just arbitrarily decide to set up a line and say, you must go no further. And despite the pledges from city officials that police were going to respect the rights of protesters, we have a video here that show what happened when the police arbitrarily decided the march could go no further.
Please leave this area. If you do not do so, you may be arrested. Other police action could include the use of chemical agents or less lethal munitions, which may inflict significant pain or result in serious injury. If you remain in the area just described, regardless of your purpose, you will be in violation of city and state law. The following routes of dispersal are available.
Protesters are throwing things back. There's a table right now. This is what's being just looked into the street right now. People are trying to kick it back.
You certainly can see there, obviously the 30-day gas ban, totally fake. Just real quick, you saw in sort of the bottom left of that second video, people with umbrellas. Those are people basically covering the retreat for people because they weren't expected to be gassed. But, I mean, it's all there in the words of the guy on the loudspeaker, Monica, regardless of your purpose. I mean, unbelievable in so many different ways. Regardless of your purpose. I mean, so the government just has the right to say that you can't just stand in the street and demand justice for people who are brutally murdered after 9 o'clock or something. I mean, this is a movement against police violence. And I think as we've seen, not just here in Buffalo and other places, the police are really showing who the real chaotic one is, who the real rioters are, who the real violent instigators are. I mean, unbelievable that, I don't want to say too much here. Obviously, it's unbelievable. But, just shows the nature of maybe not just Seattle, but the character of the police overall.
This video looks like a war zone. I mean, everything we're taught to believe about democracy in the United States, about our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. This is what these protesters are doing. The most American thing we actually can do is to make our voices heard and to stand up and demand change that we want to see from our government. And this is how the police responds. And I think the overall nationwide response of the police to these protests. And again, I don't care about the good or bad protester thing either. When we really start to see how it is the state that has a monopoly on violence, it is the state that initiates this violence at every single level. And it's really funny, to your point, Eugene, this is a movement against police brutality. And how do the police decide to respond with co-signing from both major political parties, right? They decide to respond with more repression and more violence. And it's clear that this is not stopping the movement, that folks are continuing to hit the streets in historic numbers. History is being made right in front of our eyes. We hear so much about the civil rights movement and all of these movements for justice of our past. And we're taught about it in this way that, our politicians just kind of wake up one day and they're like, okay, well, we'll sign this bill into law and we'll make this incredible progressive change. But this really just happens from people being on the ground and demanding this change and not being afraid of the repression that they're going to face. And you know why? It's because people are sick and tired, and people understand that at this point it really is a matter of life or death, particularly in a pandemic that has revealed so many of the failings and corruption of the US government, that has disproportionately killed Black communities, yet we can't even get a break from the police brutality that we have dealt with, from the absolute violence of white supremacy we have undergone for centuries. We can't even get a break from that, right? In a time of crisis like this. So it's very clear that people are losing their fear and are continuing to stand up even in the face of this relentless brutality.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you can die disproportionately from COVID-19. You can get shot, just randomly jogging down the street. You can have the cops kick in your significant other's door and kill you. You can then, just be minding your own business and be choked out on camera. Like, what else is there to fear at this point? And in terms of, looking at the response to this, we're seeing some of these semi-fascistic elements that are tied to the police in different ways. Family ties, organizational ties, white supremacist groups also emerge from the woodwork and try to suppress this movement. And we want to show something else that happened in Seattle on Sunday after this demonstration. We want to show a video here. I'll sort of narrate the video, but a guy was trying to use his car as a weapon. You see here driving into the protest. The protester there, an individual tries to stop him, obviously protect other protesters. You see him fall back there. He was shot in the arm by this individual. Really unbelievable on so many different levels. We want to show another video. I'm sorry, I'm looking down. I just want to get his name 100% correct. The really heroic move. Daniel Gregory is his name, 27 years old. We want to hear a little from him that he said right after he was shot about what happened there in Seattle.
See right here. I see a car. Watch the car. One down Pike, whatever it is. Pine. One down Pine. It's just sitting at the stoplight. I catch him. I punch him in the face. I hear the gunshot go off in my arms. I moved right in time when he reached for something. I moved right. But my whole thing was to protect those people. That's it. And my whole thing was to protect those people down there.
Did you know? Did you know who it was? Did you know that person?
What's
His name's Daniel.
I know. You're still fighting that soldier for this, baby. Is this gonna break you? Is this gonna break you?
Yeah, Daniel Gregory shot in the arm there, the upper arm. His arm was broken in this incident, but thankfully, he will recover it. But it just, you only can imagine what if this guy had opened fire on other people. But the fact that someone was willing to step in the way and try to prevent a Charlottesville-style car attack or whatever else, it seems the implication from what he was saying is he could see that the guy was armed. So it's possible he also prevented him from shooting more people. But heroic action there by Mr. Gregory.
Really, really incredible. I mean, the bravery and courageousness we are seeing in the streets in the face of this nonstop repression all across the country is so beautiful and indicative of what people power really is, right? And I think what this video actually reminded me of was a video that came out of Brooklyn about a week ago of two police cars ramming right into a group of protesters. So this movement is facing attacks on multiple fronts, not only the state violence that we are seeing in the form of the police and National Guard brutally repressing protesters all around this country, but also from these very organized and armed right-wing forces that continue to build their organizations, continue to hit the streets, as we saw a couple months ago with the reopening of the economy protests, right? Completely unfettered and just allowed to do and push this violence and this, at the end of the day, white supremacist and fascistic rhetoric we see out of all of these really highly organized far right-wing groups. And meanwhile, it is the people standing for justice, the people saying, we can't breathe, please stop killing us in the streets for all of the situations that you've mentioned that we've seen. And it's just so obvious to me that this movement is not going to stop, that especially in this time of the pandemic, people feel like they have nothing to lose. And that's really incredible. And we just need to keep this movement going.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going in Seattle and other places. People are pushing to get the mayor resigned, so it's not going away. So, yeah, no, amazing moments, even amidst all the challenges. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe the banner protest, now I don't want to say that, all the protests were great that I have seen over the past weekend, but maybe the one that made the most news around the world here in the United States was in Philadelphia, where maybe 100,000, many tens of thousands of people, it was massive, came out there. So we wanted to go to a clip that gives you at least some sense of what took place there over the weekend.
The demonstration started here on the Art Museum steps, but is now on the move. Being on the ground level doesn't do this crowd size justice, so we came up to the Art Museum steps. We can show you it stretches from one side of the oval all the way to the other, and then goes well beyond the Parkway.
As a Black woman, that I want change, because like I talk to my mom every day and she's like, that could have been your brother. That she keeps saying that could have been my son.
And you can get a flavor of it there, Monica. I'd say I was there, and it's hard to even really fully grasp the magnitude of it. I've been in some large crowds, some estimated 1 million, some estimated about 350,000. When you get to those huge numbers, and I wanted to just show this to give people a sense. I mean, you can look at this aerial footage here, and I mean, just see the huge number of people. If you know the Parkway from the Art Museum to the City Hall, this is a massive, broad avenue here in Philadelphia that stretches many, many, many blocks. I mean, this is huge. And what you're seeing in this aerial footage, I'm telling you, is truly only a fraction of the crowd. As you can see, as it continues to move, these aerial footage, there's multiple. Look at this. Look at this. At one point, the City Hall was completely surrounded by protesters. At one point, the protest tried to take a left turn to return to the Art Museum and was actually unable to do so because not the end of the march, the middle of the march was still trying to come around the way they were going. And this clip, I think, that has gone around the world here. But just a huge, massive sea of humanity. It was in response to a brutal attack by the police on a protest about a week before, people coming out to show that the movement in Philadelphia would not be cowed. But yeah, I mean, just massive.
I mean, absolutely awe-inspiring to see. And I love how you brought that up, that it is in response to the brutality we saw in Philadelphia a week ago, that really disturbing video of protesters being trapped on a highway and then tear gassed and forced to just climb over each other up this hill to escape. I actually had a friend who attended that protest last week, and he is not someone who considers himself an activist or super politically involved. And he was tear gassed and was helping bring people up that hill. And when I spoke to him afterwards, checking in with him, he said, honestly, I'm ready to go out again. And I think this is such a perfect example of that spirit of our people in a time like this, in a time of unprecedented crises in that the pandemic has pulled out, and as well just this nonstop issue of racist police brutality that we have been fighting against for centuries. And I think this is really what people power is all about. And I think also a crowd size this massive, the cops are scared. That this is exactly what they are so terrified of, and why they have been sent in to repress this movement so violently. But it backfired clearly, because more and more people are pouring out to the streets and are not afraid.
Yeah, well, and we were very honored here on Breakthrough News to be able to talk to one of the organizers of this massive march, Mecca Bullock from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and also a native Philadelphia. My first question for you is just, I think people watching around the world, it was just huge, just massive. Could you just talk a little bit about just the feeling of being out there on Saturday?
Yeah, it was incredible. I didn't realize the size of the march until it was over. So during, it kind of just felt like what we've been working with that week. And I realized, how big the march was when we got back on the steps. And, I heard the people, and I saw people stick around for an extra hour to just help each other out, to hand out waters, to lift each other's spirits. It felt really good to be in a crowd. I was really honored to be a part of it.
Well, one big thing that I think people always wonder after they see these big events is it gonna keep going? I'm curious your thoughts about where the momentum is, and maybe some of the organizing that y'all are already planning to keep the momentum up.
Yeah, I think the momentum is there. I think people are gonna keep taking to the streets. This week, there's an action happening almost every day in Philadelphia. Sometimes there's 2 or 3. people aren't afraid to come outside and like show their voice, be heard anymore. People are coming out, people are online, and they're communicating their grievances, they're signing petitions in like mass amounts. They're donating to bail funds, they're donating to community aids. People are going out of their way to be a part of this movement, and it's something I've never seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, you know, that's something I've heard from a lot of people of all ages, actually, even people who are around in the 60s, that this is just so amazing. And, you know, one thing that I really noticed in the crowd is that it seemed like a lot of people there were making sort of a deeper connection between police violence, you know, poverty, you know, even a lot of people mentioning capitalism. You know, I wonder how you feel about that. I mean, does it feel like this movement, similar to I think a lot of stuff we've seen lately, is really starting to embrace, you know, thinking about critiquing capitalism, but also going beyond it?
Yeah, people aren't just looking at it as a black and white police altercation. They're looking at it in the greater scheme. They're looking at it like, you know, these corporations that are being burned down, and the people who are representing these corporations, and the fact that their local police district protects these corporations while they spent these 3 months in their house starving. People were laid off work. Now they have to worry about going out into the streets and being beat, you know, for not having a mask. People are thinking more of it on a systemic level, it's something that like I can 100% see in my lifetime. And I don't know if I could say the same for like my parents who grew up in the 60s and the 70s. It never felt completely tangible for them, but it feels very tangible for me.
At Breakthrough News, we are funded solely by our patrons. That's what allowed us to be able to get to Minneapolis quickly and bring you the real story in real time. And we want to do much, much more of this. We want to continue to get out into the field, be on the ground, and show you exactly join us on Breakthrough.
Of course, as we've discussed, these incredible protests all across the United States, but something we're not hearing about as much is how this uprising has touched nearly every corner of the world. We are seeing protests erupt in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement against racist brutality here on every continent, pretty much. Antarctica, unconfirmed, but this is truly an amazing... We need that solidarity in whatever way, shape, or form it comes from. Interspecies solidarity, let's go with this. We have a struggle to win, but I was really excited to speak to an organizer that I actually met during my time in Berlin, and he is a Black Lives Matter organizer. He's gonna talk a little bit about the struggle in Germany and why international solidarity is so critical to this movement right now. So let's check it out.
No peace! No peace!
Maybe someone needs assistance, I'm not sure.
Wenn ich in eure Gesichter blicke, sehe ich Wut, ich sehe Zorn, ich sehe Unverständnis, Aggression, vielleicht auch Zynismus.
Your pain is our pain, and your rage is also ours. given that these system of oppressions like anti-black racism and institutionalized racism are affecting black people in the US as well as in Europe, as we can see from the police and how the police is treating our communities, it only makes a lot of sense to stand in solidarity and also to empower each other and to take the fight to the global stage. I think one of the most tragic and traumatizing cases in Germany is the case of Uri Jallo, who was a refugee from Sierra Leone, and he was arrested in one of the most notorious racist states in Germany, Saxony-Anhalt, and he burned to death in a German police cell, despite being handcuffed to a fire-resistant mattress. The police would later then claim that he committed suicide with just a regular lighter in his pocket that they didn't find when they were searching him. And despite numerous forensic findings that actually proved that he would have been impossible to do this on his own, no police was ever charged. I think this incident could have happened, in the States, in England, in France, where there are lots of black people, but it happens here in Germany, where we have approximately 1 million people, 1 million black people out of 83 million people in Germany.
Ich habe genug Abstand.
Kind of the oppressive goal to make us feel as though we are alone with this, with these issues, but we have so much power once we realize that we are fighting the same struggle.
Well,
thanks for that, Monica.
Yes, definitely. And I think what an important point to end on, the fact that international solidarity in the Black freedom struggle has a decades-long tradition. We saw the Black Panthers building with the Palestinian freedom struggle back in the 60s and 70s. Black Panthers expressing solidarity with the liberation struggles all across Africa, obviously against the war in Vietnam, in solidarity with the people fighting U.S. imperialism there. So it's really important that we continue in this long-standing tradition of internationalism when it comes to addressing the oppression of Black people and the violence that we live with every day under the system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I want to give an explicit shout out to everyone who is also following us on this show overseas, especially the folks at Pan-African Television based out of Ghana, who are helping get the messages of what's going on here in the United States onto the continent. And I think for everyone watching this outside the borders of the United States, we see you too, protesters see you too. And it really, from what I heard in Minneapolis on the ground, what I've heard in Philadelphia on the ground, it's a big factor for people here in the United States to know that people around the world are really picking up this banner and running with it and standing with them. So shout out to everybody who's sharing this live stream outside the borders of the United States and helping us get the word out, and also giving us the feedback and the input to know what's going on in other places. So fantastic package, Monica. I'm glad you're able to put this together. Well, when any big mass uprising erupts like we've seen in this country over the past few weeks, people always want to know, what's it about? What do they want? What are their demands? And one slogan, demand, however you want to refer to it, that really is cutting through all the noise is the one you see in the picture right next to me now: defund the police. And that, which is certainly a bold-faced proposition there, has caused quite a bit of consternation. There are, of course, those on the right and the defenders of the police who want to say that this is some recipe for mass chaos, but there's also many who are trying to co-opt this message in an attempt to seem like they are closer to the movement. For instance, take DC's Mayor Muriel Bowser, who was with Anderson Cooper talking about just this issue a few days ago.
Well, I think that a lot of people have different meanings for what they mean when they say defund the police. And as I've listened and read, I think most people are saying that they want reform and that they want good policing.
I don't know what she is reading or listening to. I can say from firsthand experience, she certainly isn't listening to anyone who's been actively organizing around these issues on the ground in Washington, D.C. But obviously that sentiment there, that defund the police, basically just means the status quo +1 is not what we're seeing on the streets. Something that was clearly reflected when Mayor Jacob Frey had a question around his support for defunding the police put to him at a protest in the epicenter of this uprising, Minneapolis.
Yeah. I do not support full abolition.
Jacob, go home! Go home, Jacob, go home!
Well, hard to know what to say about that. I mean, it speaks for itself. That's going to go down as an iconic image, I believe, of this protest movement. And I hope people go look at the whole video there. Very powerful moment. And I think showing what defund the police is all about. And people understand many of these hollow attempts because look at who's doing them. I mean, you look at Mayor Muriel Bowser, it just has to be said because of everything that she is doing from the Black Lives Matter Plaza to what we saw with Anderson Cooper to seem like she is down with the cause, that her entire tenure as mayor of Washington, D.C. has been marked by police murders in which there was no accountability, and she defended the police. All sorts of scandals, a massive scandal with racist T-shirts and a secret underground unit of brutal police. And there was another similar unit also of brutal police with their own T-shirts that were, celebrating shooting people between the eyes, kill shots. So that's the type of police department that Mayor Bowser has routinely defended. And her police chief, by the way, is calling for more funding for the police right now. So she's saying, yes, I support defund the police or whatever she's saying to Anderson Cooper while increasing the funds for the police. So we have to cut through all this noise. What is it really about? Obviously, this right-wing, racist caricature, quite frankly, that this is some sort of, enraged mob of people who are tearing up and destroying the world is completely fake and is rooted very deeply, I think, in the history of this country of demonizing mass protest movements, outside agitators, all of that. So let's put that aside because it's obviously not reflected on the streets. But what about the other side of the coin? If it isn't, as we're hearing from Mayor Muriel Bowser, people who are affiliated with the former Obama administration, that all it means is reform around the edges. Well, that doesn't seem right based on what we're seeing. So drilling down, what's it about? Bottom line, this is about taking the appropriate amount of resources and putting them towards things that work to help average, everyday working people. Policing claims to solve all these problems of public safety, many different other things. We're always told we need the police. But the reality is there's tens of millions of Black people in this country who have seen occupation, military-style policing, the most, disgusting and humiliating harassment-style policies like stop and frisk, and they haven't seen tragic community violence end. It just hasn't ended. We've seen, we're told we have to have the police for so many different reasons. I mean, there are tens of millions of women in this country who desperately want to end rape, but recognize that the police, who often bring sexual assault attitudes, I hate to say it like that, but police officers disproportionately have a higher rate of abusing their significant others. They have untested millions of rape kits. I mean, the shame, the humiliation that victims who come forward are often put through by the police when they report. I think we can see on all of these deeper levels, there are tens of millions of people who, yes, they want to feel safe. Yes, they want to have relations between each other that are respectable and sustainable, but they've seen this massive policing presence and they haven't seen it solve these problems. While on the other hand, we've seen the massive disinvestment in communities. We've seen the massive push to continue the type of patriarchal rape culture. I mean, all the deeper underlying issues that exist in this country around poverty, around racism, the oppression of women that are deeply rooted, baked into how this capitalist system was built up. They're not being solved by police. There are programs that are chipping them away, but they're often marginalized. They're called, entitlement programs, discretionary spending, handouts to the poor, welfare queens. I mean, anything that actually helps someone is demonized, marginalized, and underfunded. But if it's the cops killing people or the military bombing someone overseas, you can spend billions or trillions of dollars and no one bats an eyelash. And that's what defund the police is about. Millions of people who are saying, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense at all. We know what the problems are. We know their solutions. The police aren't an effective way to solve them. I mean, who are the police really is what they're saying. I mean, who do they protect? Who do they serve? The police ultimately are designed to enforce the law, which we know is unjust, is discriminatory, that protects the worst possible things that exist. The fact that there are hundreds of thousands of more empty dwellings than there are homeless people, but the law criminalizes a houseless person for seeking shelter in a storm or at any time. This is the type of system that says, well, you know, it's terrible when people loot the stores. Wage theft by employers. Wage theft by employers of people's wages is larger than all other forms of theft combined on a yearly basis. More wages are stolen than all of the so-called criminal stealing going on in the whole society. And yet that is protected by the law. You know, you steal a watch from the store, you can go to jail for 20 years. If you steal someone's wages, you just have to pay a fine, if that. So you see people recognizing this reality. Policing doesn't work. That it's not something that can be fixed, but it is something that is actually doing what it's meant to be doing, enforcing an unjust, discriminatory system. It's an us versus them mentality. And when it's an us versus them mentality, there will always be overwhelming force meted out against them. And Defund the Police is saying, let's take the resources from institutions we are seeing fail right before our eyes and put them behind the needs of the people to build up strong, resilient communities. Because when you really look at the things people want, public safety, strong, resilient communities, it's not the number of police that correspond with that. It's the access to opportunity. It's the non-existence of poverty. It's many of the things, the positive education that we know exist to make people feel safe in their communities. And that's what this is really about. There are going to be a lot of people who want to take it away from that. And it's not just because they don't want to see these things happen. They don't want to see them happen, but they also want to cover up their own failures, like the Muriel Bowsers of the world, like the Jacob Frays of the world, to do anything about this in the first place. Many of the same people trying to co-opt it created the conditions for it to happen. So it's important to continue to push on the substance of this demand that is felt by so many millions of people in this country, that policing is an institution that cannot deliver justice. It's not an institution that can deliver safety, that for that we have to go much deeper to the root causes of these issues. But it's not as if we don't know what's happening. It's not as if there aren't already successful ways that don't involve the police of attacking it. It just takes the political will of the masses in the streets to move people in that direction.
Across the country, we're seeing activists, teachers, school workers, and students demand that police get out of public schools. And on Saturday here in New York City, I attended a protest of teachers, students, activists, all of that, demanding this and also demanding defunding of the NYPD. Let's take a look. Students and education workers across the country are calling for schools to cut ties with police. This issue has garnered national attention after the Minneapolis Public School Board voted to cancel all contracts with the city's police department. A few days later in Portland, the superintendent announced that he would be discontinuing the presence of officers in the city's schools. In New York City, 1,000 protesters marched and rallied over the weekend to demand police-free schools and defunding of the NYPD. Students spoke out against racist policing and the underfunding of public schools.
We built your schools, raised generations, built your economy, and our payment, segregation, enforcing police, lack of resources, representation, lack of attention. We're tired. I'm tired.
You can't criminalize us. But today, we're going to make sure our voices is heard. Today, we demanded our funding for our communities and our schools.
New York City spends $451 million on police in its public schools every year.
And we're demanding for you guys, de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, for you guys to defund NYPD.
Nationwide, there are over 45,000 officers working full-time. In a recent year, 92,000 students were arrested in school, including 4,000 children under the age of 10. Black students are twice as likely to be referred to the police and 3 times more likely to be arrested. Activists call this a racist school-to-prison pipeline and have been demanding the removal of police from schools for years. Thousands of public school teachers have joined protests nationwide in solidarity with their students.
It is unjust that there are more SSAs in schools than there are guidance counselors and social workers combined. There are more NYPD school safety agents in our schools. So divesting from that would free a lot of funds to actually invest in our young people and the things that they need.
A recent study found that 1.7 million students attend schools with police officers, but 0 counselors.
You know, I taught and learned in schools that had metal detectors and truant officers and police, just hemming kids up, right? You know, young people need to understand that there's nothing inherently wrong with them because they're being over-policed. And I think we need counselors and education to teach the history of police brutality since the inception of this country, so that young people can understand that it's truly systemic, and we need to fight back against it.
So you heard it right there directly from students and teachers in public schools across New York City, echoing demands and concerns that we're hearing from people across the states, really connecting the issue of racist police brutality to much needed funding for our country's just absolutely dilapidated public school system, and really demanding the best for our youth. And that wraps it up for our show tonight. Thank you, as always, viewer, for joining us. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that share button. And if you haven't been keeping up with what we've been doing here at Breakthrough, we really implore you to follow us on social media at BT Newsroom. Subscribe to our YouTube, where you will receive automatic alerts as soon as we are posting new content. And of course, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/breakthrough news, to really contribute and keep the work that we're doing here going.
And as always, don't just watch us, join us on Breakthrough.